Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to Agenda. Now, the inclusion of migration in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development actually demonstrates how important migration is to development, especially of well-planned migration and well-managed migration policies. I'm sure you also know that Ghana's national policy on migration, adopted in 2016, had an implementation which is expected to reflect the what is developed by the International Organization for Migration. The key thrust of Ghana's policy is also to critically resolve some of the complex challenges that exist with migration, its effect and benefits to our country. If you look back to a couple of days, we had some Ghanaians repatriated or brought home from Libya with all the issues surrounding their return, concerns with slavery, and then the fact that the ministry is unable to even tell whether Ghanaians were affected or not affected. This afternoon, we're going to discuss migration and their challenges. We will be establishing whether migration is a problem in Ghana, what really the concerns are, what results in the large swaths of our citizens migrating to other parts of the country, taking all the risks that they take in order to get there. So let me first introduce my guest for this afternoon so we can begin our discussions. I have with me Adam Bona, who is CEO of Security Warehouse Limited. He's a security expert. And then I have Dr. Leander Kandilij, who is with the College of Humanities, University of Ghana. Gentlemen, nice to have you, and thank you very much for joining us on the agenda. So let me start with you, Mr. Bona. The migration as it is for Ghana, does it pose a security risk for our development as a country?
Thank you very much, and then good afternoon to your cherished viewers, and then good afternoon to the guys at Security Warehouse, Madam Mabel and the rest. Does it pose any security risk to us as a nation? Yes, it does. First of all, if you want to look at migration from a broader perspective, you want to look at it and probably narrow it down to, you know, two angles. You want to look at it within the country. We have serious challenges when it comes to migration. When you talk about people migrating from probably the hinterlands, coming into the urban areas, Accra, Kumasi, and the rest in search of greener pastures, if the pastures are green at all. And also we have those who migrate from what you call that across border. I'm sure is the reason why we are here. And so if you look at it with the situation in Libya, or I mean migration in general, one would say that these young people probably, I mean, there is no hope of making it here, and so they would have to go on this treacherous journey to, you know, through the Sahara Desert to Libya and try to cross over to what do you call it, Italy, if cross over to Europe if they can. And most often I've spoken to a lot of my contacts in Libya, and you know, within some of the areas that these guys group before they continue, and they will tell you that when some of these people are sold off, they are sold off within Libya to some of these rebels, and very often they are sold 2, 3, 4 times. You will move from one camp to 3 other camps, and who are the people who are in control of these oil fields in Libya? They are in the hands of you know, either some ISIS there or some rebel group there, and these people are usually sold off to and trained sometimes to take care of some of these fields. They come back, you would see these people to be your ordinary everyday civilian, yet some of these people would have been trained to handle, you know, various types of, you know, weapons, and you know, some of them might have been tortured. There are images everywhere, torture going on psychologically. Some of them are probably damaged, and so yes, it poses a serious security risk to us. We are aware, we've had a number of them repatriated back recently. I mean, I didn't hear anything about trying to reintegrate them into our society. They were just left off to go. And so I'm sure as a nation, there is a lot we can do. As a continent, there's a lot we can do.
We will be discussing what we can do.
Yeah.
But, Doctor, let me ask you. I know that we have about 20,000 or so refugees from all over the African continent. We have from Togo, Sierra Leone, Liberia, Mali, Niger, all of them in Ghana. We also have our own internally displaced people, and then we're also talking about rural urban migration. What is the scope of the migration problem for Ghana? And then I'm sure after we finish Ghana, we will look at the effect from the other surrounding neighboring countries, Togo, Cote d'Ivoire, on us also.
All right, so thank you very much, and good afternoon to your cherished viewers and listeners. And I would like to start off by probably taking a step back to see what migration is, before we then determine whether it is a security
problem for us
risk or not. So we are looking at an issue which is intrinsically a spatial phenomenon. So this has to do with the movement across spaces between one geographical area and another in a way that leads to either a permanent or a temporary change in residence. Now, the movement per se is not the problem. So migration, I will probably argue, is not necessarily a security risk. It can be a security risk, but it is not automatic that migration
it's inappropriate management that now poses the problem?
Yes. So it's very common for people to jump into the conclusion when you have isolated incidents of maybe security breaches or threats to national security, to characterize migration as a problem that needs to be solved. Migration has lots of positive benefits that we cannot run away from. Some of them include the remittances that we receive, the exchange, the cultural fusion that we get, and the opportunity to benefit from the skill set of migrants. And in the same way, our nationals migrating abroad is a positive thing, because one, it serves as a safety valve. We have a problem with unemployment in this country. So people leaving is not necessarily a problem. It's how they leave and how the whole migration paradigm is managed. If migration is managed properly, it's supposed to be a development tool. Diasporas are doing fantastic work to help with national development. Now, coming back to the scope of the problem here in Ghana.
So you want us to redefine our approach first, without necessarily calling it a problem.
Right.
It's a challenge. Is that what it is?
It is a challenge. It can be a challenge depending on how we manage it.
Okay.
So we have rural-urban migration in Ghana, and these type of movements are informed by a variety of factors. Part of it could be the issue of poverty. Part of it can be unfair or unbalanced distribution of development projects across the country. So if you are in a rural area and you don't have access to the basic amenities, then of course you want to come to an urban center. And I don't think anyone can fault you for wanting to improve your livelihood by moving. Within the sub-region, we also have incidents of movement on a daily basis under the auspices of the ECOWAS protocol, the ECOWAS movement protocol, which is another positive tool for development if it is managed properly. So long as we know who is moving and they abide by the rules, you are allowed to move within ECOWAS without any visa restrictions for at least 90 days. And if you want to extend them, you are supposed to approach the Ghana Immigration Service. The challenge we have is we have porous borders. So it's very difficult for us to know who is around. We don't know their background. We cannot do a proper security assessment of the people who are accessing our national territory. And I suspect that is the little component that can be a security challenge. Yes.
So really, how would you suggest that moving forward we deal with some of these trends you're describing so that it doesn't become necessarily a problem?
Thank you very much. I think part of the reason why, if you're looking at this issue beyond the shores of the sub-region, part of the reason why people indulge in irregular migration or they engage in irregular migration has to do with the strict visa regime. So people will necessarily move anyway, whether you like it or not. And developed countries make it extremely difficult for you to migrate regularly. So when you are faced with a situation where you have almost hit a brick wall, people being innovative will find ways around the system by migrating irregularly.
And exploiting the unconventional means.
And that explains partly the reason why lots of young people will use the Sahara Desert to access Libya with the mindset that they can probably continue to Europe. Because they don't need visas in that case. They are relying on smugglers and then people who turn out to be human traffickers to access the Libyan territory, and then they see Libya as a gateway to Europe.
Mr. Bona, Dr. Kandilage is giving us quite a scope of the issue from his perspective. This is from an intellectual standpoint. I can appreciate that. But from what he has said and from what we have on our hand, what do you think we're getting wrong in terms of using policy to fix and redirect this trend to our benefit as a country?
Thank you, and once again, good afternoon to your viewers. You know, you cannot deal with migration without, looking at the fundamentals. We have a major problem in the continent. I mean, it's a continental...
Same fundamentals
yes,
he's referring
yes,
to.
Yes, it's a continental problem.
Unemployment, lack of spatial planning.
Yes. Where we have the citizens, there's a disconnect between citizens and leadership. And so citizens have higher expectations. Leadership sometimes are not even aware of what the citizens are expecting from them. We have issues to do with corruption. I mean, tell me anywhere on the continent where, corruption is not killing, people in that country. They are pothole. I mean, you know it. I mean, and so these are not issues that one would say you can disconnect them from migration. Why would Ghanaians or sub-Saharan Africans, or Africans in general, want to take this treacherous journey? And we do also have call them, is it partners, the European, the EU. I think that on the part of the grouping, the ECOWAS and the AU, they haven't done much, to avert some of these calamities that is, unfolding. In the sense that you have the Italian government actually financing people in Libya to stem the flow of migrants through the Mediterranean into Libya, instead of probably looking at a holistic approach to solving this problem. We have not been able to do that. And also, one of the things that we seems to be missing is that when you go to Niger, the Nigerian authorities are largely also benefiting from this upsurge in migration. How? Because you have smugglers who are trafficking people. I mean, you go to an area called Agadez in, Niger, where most people from Ghana, Cameroon, Nigeria, they converge there to be trafficked to, Tripoli. And so that town has become a hotbed for traffickers, and business is booming. And the minister responsible for, the minister who advises the Nigerian government said it to BBC that, they are being careful how to stop how to deal with it, because they have young people who are not employed. And so they are thinking about, okay, if we begin to incarcerate or we begin to prosecute our own people who are trafficking people, West Africans or Africans to, Libya, our own people are going to revolt. And you can look for that video. On interview, he said it. And so it means that the continental grouping or the continental figureheads, the sub-regional figureheads, are not looking at this issue from you know, a policy point of view. Why can't we have a situation where, for instance, if you look at, I know President Trump is trying to change some of the things, but America and, you know, their neighbors had something in place which allowed the Mexicans and other people to come in there and do some work depending on the skills you have. Why can't we have a situation between ourselves as a continent and probably Europe and say, okay, we are going to have, you can't stop people from migrating, but let's have managed and controlled, you know, migration, so that I know that it doesn't matter my age, it will get to my 10 if I have to go to probably Europe to probably earn some income or get some experience. And so I would want to say, even when you come back to our own, you know, backyard, we have allowed, what do you call it, the Europeans and the Americans to tell our story when it comes to migration, isn't it? Yeah. Who are the people who started breaking the story? It was the CNNs and the BBCs and the Sky News and the rest. And so why can't our leaders within the sub-region, say for instance, TV3, they put in $100 million into TV3 and say, can you begin to tell our own story? You don't have to wait for one of these media houses in Europe or America to, because they have the power or they have the resources, they send people there. Meanwhile, we have our own TV or media houses that are doing so well. We could have invested money into, and that would have employed some of these people who would take this treacherous journey to some of these locations where there are no jobs anyway. I mean, they go there with the hope of, you know, being employed.
Greener pastures,
you know,
and they don't get any.
You get there only to realize that no, it's not as green as you were told. And so those are some of the things.
Doc, I know that at the heart of all of this discussion is also the issue of trafficking. I mean, a lot of young women and men are trafficked from Ghana to elsewhere across the globe, and there is also the issue of the nomadic herdsmen. So, I mean, whilst we're discussing migration from the perspective of legal or regular migration, the discussion of internal migration, moving from north to the south to seek greener pastures, it's also staring us in the face with trafficking at the heart of it all. So how do we begin to first perhaps clamp down on the irregular or illegal migration by tackling trafficking?
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much for that. Trafficking is actually a big problem globally. It's not a problem that is limited to Ghana. And before I address that, if I can probably just touch on one or two other points that I wanted to talk about. Yeah. And some of the reasons why people will put themselves at risk and then embark on the perilous journeys that we have talked about. Part of it also has to do with the lies and then the half-truths from the been-tos, those who've been there before. Exactly. If only people will be honest enough to tell you their real experiences of migration, that type of information will play a role in changing hearts and minds of people who are intending to migrate. That's part of it.
But sometimes when you do that, you're seen as discouraging people from enriching themselves, like you possibly have enriched yourself.
I know that's the dilemma, because
there are many people, for example, who look at some of us in the media and think that we just maybe went abroad, you got the opportunity, make big life out of yourself and come here. But they don't narrate the critical things you go through, the dehumanizing conditions you need to subject yourself to, because it's always the positive stories that actually attract interest.
And you can't blame them for shelving the dangerous and the dirty part of the story, because everyone wants to be a success story. So when they come back and they're able to afford a flashy car, a house, and then probably pull the best girl in town, and
that's
the rest
all
of
that
it,
matters.
that is what matters to them. And that story will perpetuate itself, and that is part of the problem. Then the informal economy in the destination country also has to be a key point to look at, because this is a demand and supply situation. If there's no demand for the services of these young people, there will be little supply of that type of labor. But unfortunately, even the developed countries that are complaining about being inundated by these irregular migrants, once you risk your life and then you're able to arrive safely, there's a job waiting for you. So why wouldn't they go? You see, so it's a bit dicey, and it's one that you cannot just use one tool to solve all the problems, because the causes themselves are varied. So that is something I wanted to just chip in before.
That's right, before the issue of trafficking.
Yes.
Yeah.
So trafficking has to do, just to paraphrase, I know it's a very long, when you look at the 2000 protocol, Article 3A of the protocol, it comes out with a long definition of what trafficking is. But then at the heart of it has to do with the use of deception, coercion, force to manipulate someone into a position of vulnerability where the person, the perpetrator, is seeking to derive some benefit at the expense of that person. Okay, and to characterize it, we normally just look at the act, the means, and then the intention, the purpose for doing it. And when you meet the minimum standards, we say that that person has been trafficked. It is a big problem because it involves lots of people, but it's also a big money-making exercise. And you have criminal rings that are at the heart of it. And once they are making money, it's going to be extremely difficult for you to stem it. We have instances in Ghana with regards to children who've been trafficked, sometimes sold by their own parents to fishermen on the Volta Lake, for instance. Some of them are also sold to work on cocoa farms. Some are sold even to beg. You know, there are different levels of trafficking, and then the victims, we have to look at it in a holistic kind of manner. So we know that poses a risk. Ghana has a law in place, the 2005 law on human trafficking. Is supposed to give us the legal framework within which to try and then stop this menace. It is extremely difficult because at the end of the day, it has to do with resources. And if you don't resource our police service to be able to carry out the necessary investigations, if you don't resource maybe our social workers to be able to work with the victims once they've been rescued, what happens? The psychosocial demands or needs that these victims have will have to be taken good care of. And then the case of reintegrating them back into the society. And at the heart of it has to do with education. There are some parents, we've done some research on the same issue, and we interviewed some parents who had sold their own children, and they didn't actually see anything wrong with it. One parent said that after all, she had 10 children, so giving one away was nothing. And in any case, that child was naughty. So it was seen as okay, but then also as a punishment to this apparently naughty child and whatnot. So education is also critical if we are supposed to deal with this issue. The security elements of the nomadic community, I mean, that you've spoken about, the Fulani, is a tricky one because we have some of them who are more or less, I mean, for all intents and purposes, they are Ghanaians. Yeah. These are second generation, third generation Fulani. They were born in Ghana. Probably they understand the local language even better than myself. Yeah. They know the system very well. So that is an example of maybe a failure in terms of integrating them into our community. Why are they still perceived as Fulani? Is it just how they look? If you find yourself in the US and then you get your paperwork, you have an American passport, but just because of the way you look, you are constantly referred to as Ghanaian. I suspect you will be upset about that. And these are children of second, third, fourth generation Fulani who are still characterized as Fulani. What makes them Fulani? They are Ghanaians. So there should be a pathway for them to fit into our system. Right,
yes. Dr. Kandalege, we still, this is still agenda, and we still have Adam Bona, who is a security expert, and Dr. Leander Kandalege is from the College of Humanities, University of Ghana. Now, earlier this week, President Akufo-Addo and the French counterpart, Emmanuel Macron, interacted here in Accra, and the president spoke about the migration situation and the slave trade allegations in Libya. Let's listen.
Resolving the crisis in Libya is not just resolving it internally for the Libyan people. Not only does it therefore provide an opportunity to bring to an end these barbaric acts, these acts of savagery that are taking place against Africans on Libyan soil, but it also provides an opportunity finally to come to grips with the crisis in the Sahelian region. And therefore, the coordination that the African countries are now wanting to undertake, better to organize their response, both to the issues in the Sahel and to Libya, are extremely important for the stability of our region. Whether it is Boko Haram, the jihadists in Mali, those who are menacing the stability of Niger, of Chad, of Burkina Faso, there is a common link, which is the terrorist emanations from Libya. So it's extremely important that all of us, as effectively as possible, of course, if we have partners such as France, who have indicated their preparedness to be involved in that coordination, the better it is for us. But it is a matter of primordial concern for us in this region. If we don't come to grips with the situation in Libya, it's going to become difficult to come to grips with these, what I consider to me, ancillary, subsidiary matters that are taking place in the Sahelian region.
Welcome to Agenda. We still have in the studio Dr. Leander Kandelij and Adam Bona. Pretty shortly we'll be getting onto Skype and we'll be speaking to Ghanaian and the diaspora to get a fair assessment from them what they make of this whole Libya crisis. Let's go to her first though. Awolasewa, good afternoon and thank you very much for joining us at such a short notice.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and now the Ghanaians who returned from Libya, there were quite a lot of issues with their arrival in Ghana. Preceding their arrival, I beg your pardon, there were the discussions of slave trade in Libya, and there were also concerns by the Foreign Affairs Minister who was unsure, was not exactly specific on whether Ghanaians were affected or not affected and all of that. What are you in the diaspora making of these developments back home in Ghana and Libya as well?
Well, as Pan-Africanists, we think that the treatment of Africans is horrible and it should be stopped. So it doesn't really matter whether they were Ghanaian nationals or Nigerian nationals. They were African people and they should not be exploited or trafficked as they are being held in deplorable conditions in Libya. It's unacceptable and they should be stopped straight away, should be stopped forthwith. There's no explanation for this, no excuse for this.
I know that beyond the demand to have it stopped are also discussions of what policies need to be put in place in our home countries, Ghana, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, and all those African countries to ensure that our citizens stay home and if they stay home, become productive. What should we be thinking about doing?
Well, absolutely. You've hit the nail on the head. Why are people leaving the continent or the country in droves? Some of them are seduced by the West. Others are looking for a better way of life. Now, if our countries were thriving economically, some people will still want to go for a change, but they will not be going in droves. So I think it's important that we put our house together and we look at growing the economy. I am encouraged by the president's talk of one district, one factory. And I think that that's the way, if it's properly implemented. It's a vision he has. Visions need to come, but he needs to drive them. And if it's properly implemented, would have employment. And with the employment, you have people staying in the country and being productive. So I think we need to have our countries doing well economically. But if I might say something very quickly, the West also needs to take responsibility for overthrowing Colonel Gaddafi. Because you would note that a lot of what is happening has started since the overthrow of Colonel Gaddafi and the destabilization of Libya. So I think there needs to be some accountability from the West.
Right. Well, also, before we make you go, I know that the key question is that you, for example, you live in London, you are a migrant, you definitely left the shores here, whether good or bad. The discussions from our experts suggest that migration is not necessarily good, that if people like yourself who bring a wealth of experience back home, if you make the decision to return, it's good. So should we also be encouraging regular migration for those categories of our citizens who seek knowledge, who seek expertise and experience with the hope that they will come back home and reinvest whatever they gain back there into our country?
Absolutely. And as you know, even those of us who are in the diaspora, we are contributing to the building of Ghana. And you're 100% right. We should be using our skills and expertise together with those in Ghana who also have a wealth of knowledge and expertise. And together we can build the country. You can build from within and you can build from without. But I do accept that it's a good thing for us to be in Ghana building. But even whilst we are away, we can be helping to put the right conditions within the countries we originate from, so that Ghana and other African countries would be pleasant places to live, and we wouldn't have people leaving in droves. People have come for different reasons. I mean, I came to join my husband, and we will be returning to Ghana in the near future. But people come for different reasons. And I would say that on the coast, on the shores of Africa, we need safe havens. So if people are fleeing countries for political reasons, they are being tortured or whatever, there should be safe havens for them. Just like during the Liberian crisis, we had the Bujumbura camp where Liberians found refuge. We should have more safe havens. And I think in Rwanda, the Rwandan government has said that they would like to offer refuge to the Africans who are being treated in a deplorable manner in Libya. So we should all take a cue from this.
Right. Awola Serwaa, we're grateful for your time. Thank you very much. Awola Serwaa joined us from London on Skype. She is part of the diasporans, the Pan-African diasporans. She's very outspoken on a key number of issues affecting our country. Let's return to the studio. Let me start with you, come back to you, Dr. Kandilage. The President Akufo-Addo, in his presentation, for me, I heard one thing, that we need a concerted approach in dealing and tackling with the crisis that is happening in Libya. And I get the impression he's saying, hey, this is a bigger problem than what we're seeing and we need to work together. Do you see the President's approach to this as the right way to go?
Thank you very much. I think the President is right in saying that we need a concerted effort when we are faced with challenges like this. But then I want to find out what the governments of individual countries are doing per se. So we have Ghanaians who are supposed to have been brought back apparently by IOM. And we understand they were given an amount to aid with their reintegration into the country, about 420 Ghana cedis. And there was an outcry that the amount is not enough. They didn't do psychosocial assessment before letting them into the community. But what I ask myself is, where is the government? You know, in extracting our nationals from a conflict situation, extracting our nationals from conditions that are not conducive, where is the government? The government can partner.
The IOM brought our citizens, so yes, government should have been involved in the whole operation.
Yes, so we should be at the forefront of these arrangements. In 2011, when Ghanaians had to be brought, over 19,000 of them, or nearly 19,000 Ghanaians were brought. Again, it was the international institutions that played the key role. So concerted effort, but then governments should not sit back and expect the international community to always be the people championing the cause. UNHCR, IOM, and the likes can come in, but then you have to show them the direction. And a fundamental problem that we have is the issue of data. So we have our foreign minister who wasn't quite sure whether Ghanaians were involved or not. And if you were to find out how many Ghanaians currently live in Libya, that would be a challenge that any government will struggle to do. And we need people to register. We need migrants to register. And why are they not registering is because of the issue of trust. They don't trust our embassy staff. They don't trust our representatives who are out there. So people are reluctant to volunteer information about themselves. But by not doing that, it then means that when there is a crisis, you are stuck. You don't know how many people you should be planning to rescue from that conflict situation. And I suspect this is part of the challenge that we have to look into. On the issue of development being seen as a solution to young people leaving the shores of the country, I think on this platform and then others, there's been that kind of mantra that has been repeated over and over again. But I want to caution that development per se does not stop migration. Okay? If anything at all, it facilitates migration. We have a theory, I know this is a bit academic, but then we have the migration harm theory, for instance, which actually charts out what happens, the relationship between migration and then development. As countries develop, migration goes up, immigration goes up initially until it peaks and then reduces gradually. So that link is a false one, and the EU is very quick to say that if only we were to develop, then our people will stay at home. If we develop, we will come there sooner. It's just that we will come through regular channels.
Regular channels, right. So let me, before I speak to you, Mr. Bona, I need you to react to Mr. Emmanuel Koting, who has been speaking to us, who spoke to us earlier about some of the challenges involved with the screening of those Ghanaians who arrived from Libya.
In fact, the standard practice is situations of this nature. First and foremost, if let's assume Ghana had a diplomatic mission in Libya. Unfortunately, because of the condition in Libya, we didn't have one. It was closed down. And I think Malta had concurrent oversight responsibility over Libya. They would have done their background checks to make sure that all the returnees are Ghanaians. But let us not make a mistake. Having a Ghanaian passport does not mean you are actually a Ghanaian. We are all in this country and we know how it is easy to acquire Ghanaian passports. And for convenience and for the fact that Ghanaians enjoy some sort of leverage in the international communities, you see other African countries, citizens coming into Ghana and having Ghanaian passport for the purposes of traveling. What is so interesting about this discussion is that, you see, it is a politician making a very excellent assessment of the security threat these people could pose to Ghana. So I want to urge all other policy makers in government who have oversight responsibility in some of these things to depoliticize the situation and pay heed. If you realize when Murtala was speaking, the other panelists could not help but agree with all the things he said. So as part of the processes, like I mentioned from Libya, when these deportees arrive into the country, we have what we call comfort homes. Comfort homes is where you keep these deportees. Then you call the security agencies to come and debrief them. You call psychologists to come. Obviously, they've gone through some kind of trauma. But in our part of the world, it doesn't exist. But if you look at the international convention, Ghana is supposed to have this kind of the comfort homes I'm talking about.
Right, so Emmanuel Koting is a security analyst. So Ms. Adam Bona, I know I left it to this part so we can hear him before you make your closing remarks on Libya and how you heard him talk about how the screening was supposed to be done and was not done. What's the way forward? Well,
I think everything he said, he was, right on point. Before these people arrived, it took a certain media house to Al Jazeera and the rest to put it out there. And then we started running around, and so there was the need for us to see how this, our nationals, I mean, you want to say in quote, our nationals would be brought in. IOM got involved, and eventually we had about 160 something being brought back. But then what, you know, measures did we put in place before they are, you know, airlifting them from Libya and before they touching the shores of, you know, Ghana? We didn't put in, there was really nothing. They came in, you know, we gave them hampers here and there. We gave them some goodies and say, okay, you're on your own. You're on your own. No proper data was collected. We didn't know where are you going to, are you actually going there? There is nothing to suggest that these people who came, just like you said, whether they are Ghanaians or how many of them are not Ghanaians.
Well, they received medical screening.
Exactly.
Their state of mind, counseling,
you know,
psychological.
Where they touch it. Are we going to? And so the idea is to make sure wherever these people find themselves, we are able to constantly monitor and provide them the needed support. Remember, some of them have been there for several years. Yeah. Some of them have been detained, you know, put under, you know, harsh conditions. And so if these people are coming back and you expect them to fuse into our system, you know, like myself and you, that's not going to work. And so when it comes to the security and safety, this country is something that sometimes some of us try to say, well, we'll stop talking about it, because then every now and then government after government doesn't seem to be getting it right. The intelligence community, I mean, we don't really have intelligence network that's working. If we had all these things in place, to be honest with you, they would have been working with the you know, the IOM and the rest, making sure that these people who are coming have been vetted. We should have vetted them there before airlifting them. We didn't do no vetting, but the idea was, let's quickly bring them. So we brought them. How many of them are going to pose a problem or a challenge to us back here? We are not aware.
Many of them are going to go back. Anyway.
You know, many of them, as we speak, some of them, I mean, as at last night when I spoke to a contact in Agadezi in Niger, he told me we have a lot of Ghanaians. And I mean, it's interesting. I'm hoping and praying that the Ghanaian government, our government, would send intelligence officers, they would send people, you know, some of these NGOs to go there and try and stop these people from undertaking that journey. They are in this makeshift, you know, mad houses waiting for money. You know what they do? Most of them get to that point at Gedezi and they have to call home, because then before you get there, you don't have the money. You get there, you have to call home and say, for me to be put into some pickup truck to, what do you call it, Tripoli, is going to cost maybe $500. And for that $500, sometimes they have to sell animals, they have to sell property. Sometimes they stay there for 6 months.
Wow.
And they go through a lot. They buy a bottle of this, about, you know, 5 liter water, 5 liter, you know, gallon of water for $3. Okay? Water is like gold in the Sahara Desert. And our sons and daughters, our brothers and sisters, our relations are going through all this.
Very worrying.
Very worrying.
Doc, do you get the impression that the silence of the AU on this is worrying?
Well, the AU has ultimate responsibility for whatever happens on the continent. And the leaders of the AU have done enough talking. I think it's about time they started acting. So that is critical. So if I don't know how much time we have, but then what the way forward? Yeah, looking at the broader picture beyond just the irregular migration component, but then that will be included as well. I think one of them will be to increase opportunities or avenues for regular migration. That will help. Then two, bilateral
cut
agreements.
back on the restrictions on visas and allow people who
travel legitimately.
Who meet the criteria to travel legitimately.
Yes. And then secondly, we should be looking at bilateral arrangements between Ghana and then the popular destination countries, so that we have it streamlined and they will not even think about abusing our nationals. And also the setting up of migration information centers in each region. I think that is also critical. IOM has a center in the Brona-Hartford region. Why? Because that happens to be the region that sends out the most irregular migrants through Libya with the hope of getting to Europe. But we shouldn't limit it to just the Brona-Hartford region. We should be looking at replicating that across the country. Also, we should look at closer collaboration between the government, and then the intergovernmental and international institutions. IOM is doing a fantastic job, but then the other institutions are also there, and we need that close collaboration to be able to interact. The interaction has to be two-way. And then the creating of livelihood opportunities at home as part of the solution to discourage people from even thinking of venturing into these perilous journeys. That will be critical as well. Then greater sensitization needs to be done as well on the risks that are associated with irregular migration. Regular migration, fine, but then the risks associated with irregular migration, those risks have to be made very clear. And part of what our contributor also talked about was the setting up of what our class as reception centers. So these people, when they are brought, a proper assessment is done, and then the needs are all profiled, and ongoing reintegration support can then be delivered to them. But you need a safe space within which the likes of the Immigration Service and the other institutions can function.
Dr. Kandeleji, I think our time is up, and grateful for you gentlemen for coming, Adam Bona and Dr. Leander Kandeleji. I'm Stephen Enti, and this has been Agenda. Thanks for making time.